I was looking at a wiring diagram of a house the other day. It's actually quite comforting, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. How so?
Well, you can trace the copper line.
Yeah.
It runs from the breaker box through the studs in the wall up to the switch and then straight to the light bulb. It's continuous.
Right. It's a solid connection. Metal touching metal.
Exactly. If you cut that wire, the light goes out. It's binary. It's either on or it's off. There's no maybe.
That's the classic circuit. Electrons flowing like water in a pipe. It's incredibly reliable, it's predictable, and it's remarkably fast.
Right. And I think for a long time, that is exactly how I pictured the human body. I mean, even in high school biology, we talk about nerves, like they are these biological copper wires.
It's a really common and intuitive image.
Totally. You touch a hot stove, the electricity zips up your arm, hits the spine, zips back down, and you pull away. The whole thing feels instantaneous.
It's a very clean model. It's also completely wrong.
Well, that's why we're here. Because when I really dug into the stack for today, and we have a monster stack, I realized that the nervous system isn't defined by the wires.
No.
It's defined by the breaks in the wires.
The gaps.
The gaps. The places where the copper wire just stops, and the signal has to essentially jump off a cliff and hope there is something to catch it on the other side.
That is a poetic but a surprisingly accurate way to describe the synapse. And you are so right to focus on it. If we were just wires, if we were all hardwired from point A to point B, you wouldn't be a human being.
I wouldn't.
You'd be a toaster.
A toaster. Because a toaster doesn't have a choice.
Precisely. A toaster doesn't decide not to toast the bread if it's feeling a bit down, or if it remembers that you burned the bagel yesterday morning. Hardwiring gives you incredible speed, but it gives you zero nuance.
Oh.
The synapse, that's where the maybe happens. It's where the body decides to shout a message, whisper it, or just crush it into silence before it ever gets heard.
So that is our mission for this deep dive. We are looking at synaptic and junctional transmission. We are going to figure out how the body bridges that gap. And to do it, we are synthesizing two absolute Bibles of medical physiology.
The heavy hitters.
We've got Ganong's review of medical physiology, and we've got the legendary Guyton Hall textbook of medical physiology. And I have to say, reading them side by side on this topic was a trip because they feel like they were written by two completely different personalities.
Oh, absolutely. It's a fantastic contrast. Ganong is like, okay, think of a molecular biologist who is just obsessed with the tiniest gears in a watch.
Okay.
He wants to show you the protein folding, the ion channels popping open, the little recycling vesicles. He wants you to see the machinery under the hood. He lives at the nanometer scale.
He wants you to see the engine. And Guyton.
Guyton reads like a systems engineer at NASA. He's standing back looking at the whole rocket. He's all about the specs. He wants to know about redundancy, safety margins, reliability under stress.
So not just how it works, but how it doesn't fail.
Exactly. He's asking, how do we build the system so it doesn't fail when you're running a marathon or under attack? We need both of those perspectives to really get the full picture.
So just to set the stage for everyone listening.
Yeah.
This isn't us reading the textbook to you. You absolutely need to go read the chapters, specifically the ones on synaptic transmission and the neuromuscular junction. Our job today is to provide the map.
A conceptual framework.
Right. We want to give you the structure so that when you go back to the book, you're not just memorizing names like synaptobrevin. You're understanding why it has to be there.
Exactly. And we are really looking for the regulation versus capacity theme today. Where does the body prioritize raw speed, and where does it say, no, hold on, control is more important here?
Let's jump right in. Section 1, the architecture of the synapse. We keep saying gap, but is it always a gap? I mean, with billions and billions of neurons, aren't there some places where they just, fuse together?
There are, and this is a really important distinction to make right at the start. Broadly, we have two ways to connect neurons: electrical synapses and chemical synapses.
The electrical synapse sounds a lot like that hardwiring we just said was wrong.
It's the closest biological equivalent to it, yes. In an electrical synapse, the membranes of the two cells come extremely close together. We're talking about a distance of roughly 3.5 nanometers.
Which is, for all intents and purposes, touching.
Pretty much. And they are bridged by these little protein tunnels called gap junctions.
Gap junction.
Right? Imagine a series of tiny, hollow pipes running directly from the cytoplasm of one cell into the cytoplasm of the neighbor.
So the ions, the actual electrical current, can just flow right through. No conversion, no delay.
Freely. There is almost zero resistance. It's a low-resistance bridge. If cell A fires its action potential, the current flows straight into cell B and makes it fire instantaneously.
That sounds incredibly efficient. So the question becomes, why did we evolve away from that? Why isn't the whole brain built that way?
Because it's too democratic.
Too democratic.
In an electrical synapse, the signal can usually go both ways. It's bidirectional.
Ah, so there's no forward arrow.
Exactly, and it's an indiscriminate. If you want a whole group of cells to act as a single unit, like a mob, all doing the same thing at the same time, it's perfect. It synchronizes them.
Okay, where do we see that in the body? Where is that synchronization critical?
The heart is the classic example. We call it a functional syncytium. When the pacemaker cell in the heart fires, you want the entire ventricle to contract at once to powerfully squeeze the blood out.
You don't want the muscle fibers having a committee meeting about whether it's good time to beat.
But I'm not really feeling it today, guys. That would be fatal.
Right.
Or in the smooth muscle of your gut, you want that wave of peristalsis to be coordinated to push food along. So electrical synapses are great for synchronization. But now think about your thoughts. Think about typing an email.
Aye.
You need to hit the T key, but you specifically need to not hit the R or Y keys right next to it. You need precision. You need directionality. You need control.
And that requires the other type, the chemical synapse.
That requires the chemical synapse. This is the star of the show. And this is where the gap gets real. In a chemical synapse, the cells are separated by what we call the synaptic cleft.
And Gannon puts this at about 20 to 40 nanometers wide.
Which sounds tiny. But to an electron or an ion, that is an uncrossable ocean. The electrical signal comes racing down the nerve at hundreds of miles per hour, and suddenly it hits the edge of the cliff. It cannot jump.
The physics just don't allow it.
The physics don't allow it. The resistance of that fluid-filled gap is too high. So it has to change modes.
It has to translate.
It has to translate its language.
Yeah.
It has to turn from an electrical signal, which is a change in voltage, into a chemical signal, which is a molecule. That chemical has to then diffuse or swim across that ocean, find the other side, and then, and only then, get translated back into a new electrical signal.
And this introduces a delay, right? It can't be instantaneous anymore.
It does. A synaptic delay. It's tiny, maybe half a millisecond or so, but it's there. And it's additive. If a signal has to cross 10 synapses, that's 10 delays.
But what we lose in raw speed, we gain in control.
We gain everything in control. And Guyton points out a crucial, fundamental principle here, the one-way conduction rule.
I highlighted that. It seems so simple on the surface, but the implications are massive.
It's the traffic law of the entire nervous system. Chemical synapses only work in one direction, always. From the sender, which we call the presynaptic terminal, to the receiver, the postsynaptic membrane.
Why is that so absolutely critical?
Because it creates order out of what would otherwise be complete chaos. It separates sensation from action. When you touch that hot stove, the signal goes to the brain. The command to pull your hand away goes from the brain to the muscle.
If signals could run backward.
You'd have feedback loops everywhere. A command to move your arm would also generate a sensation of being touched. You'd be a ball of static. Nothing would work. The chemical synapse gives the nervous system a forward arrow. It allows for organized, sequential processing.
Okay, let's zoom in on the machinery of this forward arrow. We're standing at the edge of the cliff, the presynaptic terminal. Gannon calls it the terminal bouton.
Which is just French for button. It's a little swelling, a little knob at the very end of the axon.
And it's not empty space in there. It's packed. If we could shrink down, what are we looking at?
If you were inside that button, you'd see two main things. First, you'd be surrounded by mitochondria.
The power plants of the cell.
Everywhere. And that's your first clue that this process is incredibly expensive. It burns a ton of ATP to manufacture neurotransmitters, package them, and reset the system after every single firing event.
And the second thing?
You'd be wading through bubbles. Thousands and thousands of them.
These are the synaptic vesicles.
Exactly, and you should think of them as loaded cannonballs, or maybe water balloons filled with a specific chemical message. They're waiting in racks, docked right up against the inner surface of the membrane, ready to be launched.
And inside each of these bubbles are thousands of molecules of a neurotransmitter, something like acetylcholine or glutamate or GABA.
That's right. The message is packaged and ready to go.
So the cannon is loaded. The target is across the water on the postsynaptic side. Now we need the fuse. This brings us to section 2, the presynaptic launch.
The launch is fascinating because it's the moment of translation. So the electrical signal, the action potential, comes speeding down the axon. It arrives at the button. The membrane of that button depolarizes. Its voltage shoots up.
And this is where our favorite ion makes its grand appearance, calcium.
It's always calcium. In physiology, sodium and potassium are the workhorses. They move the electricity around. But calcium is the boss. Calcium is the trigger for almost every important intracellular event.
So the voltage changes, and that change opens up some doors for calcium.
Precisely. Sprinkled all over that presynaptic terminal are voltage-gated calcium channels. They are closed at rest, but they sense the electricity of the action potential and they snap open.
And where is the calcium coming from?
It's all outside the cell. The concentration of calcium in the extracellular fluid is orders of magnitude higher than it is inside the cell. So the moment those doors open, there is a massive electrochemical gradient. Calcium rushes in like water through a broken dam.
And this is the point of no return.
It is the critical step. If you block those calcium channels, say, with certain drugs or in certain diseases, the nerve can fire all day long, the action potential can arrive perfectly, but nothing will ever happen at the synapse.
The electrical signal just hits the end and dies out.
It just fizzles. Calcium is the one and only thing that tells the vesicles, go.
So calcium rushes in, it finds a vesicle, and then we have this concept that Ganong spends a lot of time on, quantal release.
Right. It's a way of saying the body is digital, not analog. We don't release a continuous stream of chemical spray like an aerosol can. We release discrete packets. One vesicle equals one quantum of release.
So it's either one vesicle or 2 or 100, but never 1.5.
Never 1.5. It's quantized.
Right.
And the numbers here are just staggering. Gannon points out that one single vesicle of acetylcholine at the neuromuscular junction holds about 10,000 molecules.
10,000 molecules in one bubble. And Guyton adds that a single nerve impulse, a single action potential, causes the release of about 125 of those vesicles.
So do the math. That's over 1 million molecules of transmitter flooding that tiny gap in a fraction of a millisecond. It's a massive chemical shout.
But here's the mechanical question that always bothered me, and I think it bothers a lot of students. You have a bubble inside the cell. You need to dump its contents outside, but the cell membrane is a barrier. It's a fatty wall. You can't just push it through.
You have to fuse them. You have to merge the skin of the bubble with the skin of the cell. And this isn't easy because membranes, which are made of lipids, naturally repel each other. They have negative charges. They want to stay apart.
So you have to physically force them together.
You need a winch. You need a powerful mechanical device to grab them both and pull them together. And this is where Ganong's molecular biologist side really shines. He introduces us to the snare proteins.
SNARE. I remember reading this and thinking it sounded like Velcro or maybe a zipper.
A zipper is the perfect analogy. So you have one half of the zipper on the vesicle. That's called the V-snare. The main one to remember there is called synaptobrevin.
Great name.
It's a fantastic name. And then you have the other half of the zipper sitting on the target membrane, the cell's outer wall. Those are the T-snares. The two big ones are syntaxin and SNAP25.
Okay, so the vesicle floats down with its V-snare hanging off it.
And it docks near the T-snares. It just sort of sits there waiting. Then the action potential arrives, calcium plugs in, and that calcium acts on another protein called synaptotagmin, which is the calcium sensor.
So calcium doesn't directly touch the snares.
Not directly. Calcium binds to synaptotagmin, and that's what gives the final go signal to the snares. It causes them to twist around each other. They coil up like tightening ropes.
And as they coil, they pull.
They winch the vesicle down until it is physically crushed against the cell membrane. The lipids are forced to rearrange.
And the tension pops a hole open.
A fusion pore. Exactly. The membranes merge, the pore opens, and whoosh, the transmitter dumps out into the synaptic cleft. That whole process is called exocytosis.
So the message is sent, and then what? You have this empty vesicle wrapper stuck to the membrane.
Right, you can't just leave it there. The cell surface would just get bigger and bigger, so you have to recycle. You pull that piece of membrane back in, coat it with a protein called claprin, and reform it into a new empty vesicle that can be refilled. That's endocytosis.
That sounds slow. Rebuilding it from scratch every time.
It is relatively slow, and that's why Ganong also mentions this other mechanism called kiss and run.
Which frankly sounds like a bad high school date.
It does a bit. But in kiss and run, the vesicle doesn't fully merge with the membrane. It just docks. The fusion pore opens for a split second. It kisses the membrane, spits out some transmitter, and then the pore closes and the vesicle just runs off intact.
So it's a shortcut.
It's a huge shortcut. It allows the neuron to keep firing at very high frequencies without running out of ready-to-go ammunition.
Now, speaking of the machinery breaking down, Ganong has a clinical box right in this section that I found both fascinating and terrifying. It turns out some of the deadliest toxins known to humanity, target exactly this zipper mechanism we just described.
This is where physiology becomes life and death medicine. We are talking about clostridial toxins, specifically botulinum toxin and tetanus toxin.
Botox and tetanus. One makes you limp and flaccid, one makes you stiff and rigid.
Correct, but chemically, they are almost identical. They are both proteases, which are enzymes that cut other proteins, and they specifically cut snare proteins.
So they literally take a pair of molecular scissors to the zipper.
That's exactly what they do. Let's take botulinum toxin, or Botox. You eat some improperly canned food, or you pay a dermatologist a lot of money, and this toxin gets into your system. It has a preference for the motor neurons that talk to your muscles. It gets inside the nerve terminal, and it finds SNF25 or synaptobrevin and just snips it in half.
So the zipper is broken, the action potential arrives, calcium comes in.
And then nothing happens. The vesicle can't dock, the winch can't pull, no acetylcholine is released, your brain is screaming, contract! But the phone line at the very last inch is dead.
So the muscle stays relaxed.
Completely relaxed. That's flaccid paralysis, great for wrinkles on your forehead.
But very bad for your diaphragm.
Exactly. If it hits the diaphragm, you stop breathing.
Now compare that to tetanus. Lockjaw. You are rigid. Spastic paralysis. How does cutting basically the same protein cause the exact opposite effect?
Tetanus is much more devious. It gets into the body through a puncture wound. It finds a motor neuron, gets inside, but it doesn't stay there. It hitches a ride on the cell's internal transport system and travels backward, what we call retrograde transport, all the way up the axon to the spinal cord.
So it invades the central headquarters.
It does, and once it's in the spinal cord, it doesn't attack the motor neuron itself. It jumps to the inhibitory interneurons that connect to the motor neuron, the little neurons whose job it is to say, relax.
So it cuts the brake lines.
It cuts the brake lines. It stops the release of the inhibitory transmitters, which are glycine and GABA. So now your motor neurons are getting all the go signals from your brain, but none of the stop signals from within the spinal cord.
But you're getting gas, 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 and no brakes.
And they fire uncontrollably. Every muscle in your body contracts at once and won't let go. That's spastic paralysis.
That is a horrific way to die.
It is, but it illustrates perfectly that the synapse isn't just a generic connection. The location of the synapse and the type of transmitter being blocked matter just as much as the core machinery.
Let's move to the other side of the gap. The signal has launched. The transmitter is floating across the cleft. Now we need to catch it. Section 3. The neuromuscular junction.
The NMJ. This is Guyton's favorite subject. He sees it as the pinnacle of reliable engineering. This is the connection between a motor nerve and a skeletal muscle fiber.
And Guyton treats this very differently than the synapses in the brain. He calls it a high-fidelity system. What does he mean by that?
Think about what a muscle needs to do. If a tiger jumps out at you and your brain says run, you do not want your leg muscles to have a debate about it. You don't want a maybe. You need a 100% guarantee that the signal will get through.
Okay, so how does the body engineer a guarantee into this system?
It overbuilds everything. First, let's look at the anatomy. The nerve doesn't just touch the muscle, it invaginates into it. It sits in a little trough. And the muscle membrane on the other side isn't flat. It has these deep folds called subneural clefts.
Like trenches. What's the point of the folds?
It massively increases the surface area. And lining that entire increased surface area are the receptors.
The catcher's mitts.
Exactly. In this case, they are nicotinic acetylcholine receptors. They are packed in there at an incredible density right at the tops of those folds.
So you have a huge target to hit.
A huge target. And these receptors are chemically gated ion channels. They just sit there closed. But when two molecules of acetylcholine bind to them, the channel snaps open.
And what goes through?
Mostly sodium. A huge rush of positive sodium ions flows into the muscle cell, depolarizes it, and that triggers the muscle action potential. And boom, contraction.
But here's the Guyton engineering principle that I absolutely love. It's called the safety factor.
I circled this about 5 times in my copy. It explains so much about clinical medicine.
Break it down for us.
The stat is incredible. When a nerve fires at the neuromuscular junction, it releases about 3 times as much acetylcholine as is strictly necessary to trigger the muscle to fire.
3 times the required dose. Every single time.
Yes. If the threshold to fire the muscle is, let's say, 100 arbitrary units of stimulation, the body dumps 300 units worth of acetylcholine.
Why on earth would it be so wasteful? Why waste the energy?
Because biological systems are messy and can get tired. Sometimes you don't release as many vesicles. Sometimes the enzymes that clean up the acetylcholine work a little too fast. Sometimes you're fatigued from exercise. The 3x safety factor ensures that even if you are operating at 50% capacity, the signal still gets through. The muscle still fires.
It's redundancy. It's like building a bridge that can hold 3 times the legal weight limit.
It is exactly that. It's the difference between a system that works usually and a system that keeps you alive when you are running from that tiger.
But there is a catch, right? You dump all this chemical into the gap to guarantee the signal. But you can't just leave it there.
Absolutely not. If acetylcholine hangs around, the receptors stay open, the muscle membrane stays depolarized, and a depolarized membrane can't reset to fire again. You'd get one single twitch, and then the muscle would be paralyzed.
So you need a very, very fast cleanup crew.
You need an enzyme, and that enzyme is acetylcholinesterase. It hangs out in the synaptic cleft, kind of anchored to the collagen fibers in there, and it is one of the fastest, most efficient enzymes known to science.
How fast are we talking?
It grabs acetylcholine and rips it apart into acetate and choline in milliseconds. It clears a gap so quickly that the muscle can repolarize and be ready for a new signal in a fraction of a second. This is what allows you to do things like play the piano or sprint or even just have a smooth, controlled movement.
Okay. Now we have to talk about what happens when this beautifully over-engineered system with its huge safety factor fails. Because we have 2 diseases that are the classic board exam questions for every medical student: myasthenia gravis and LEMS.
This is the perfect compare and contrast exercise. Both cause profound muscle weakness. Both are problems at the neuromuscular junction, but they are mechanistically mirror images of each other.
Let's start with myasthenia gravis, MG.
MG is an autoimmune disease. For reasons we don't fully understand, your body's immune system decides that your own acetylcholine receptors are the enemy. It produces antibodies that bind to them and destroy them.
So the catcher's mitts are being removed from the field.
They're gone, or at least their numbers are drastically reduced. So now think about the safety factor. The nerve fires. It dumps the normal 3x amount of chemical, but there are only half as many receptors to catch it.
So the signal that the muscle hears is much weaker.
Exactly. The safety factor drops from a healthy 3.0 to maybe 1.1, or in severe cases, Gramo 9. And here is the key clinical symptom that you can reason out from this: fatigue that gets worse with repetitive use.
Why worse with use?
Because even in a healthy person, when a nerve fires repeatedly and rapidly, the number of vesicles released with each impulse drops a little bit. The nerve terminal gets slightly tired. In a healthy person with a safety factor of 3, you never ever notice this. A drop from 300 units to 250 is still way above the 100-unit threshold.
But in the MG patient?
In the MG patient, they're starting at, say, 110 units. The first contraction works, but the second one, they only release 95 units worth, and suddenly they're below threshold. The muscle fails to contract.
So they wake up in the morning feeling okay, but by the end of the day, their eyelids are drooping. That's post-S, they have double vision. They can't chew their dinner.
Exactly. The more they try to use a muscle, the weaker it gets.
Now let's flip the script. Lambert-Eaton myasthenic syndrome, LEMS.
LEMS is also autoimmune, but it's often a perineoplastic syndrome, meaning it's caused by a cancer somewhere else in the body, usually a small cell lung cancer.
And what's the target here?
The body attacks the nerve terminal, not the muscle receptors. Specifically, it attacks the voltage-gated calcium channels on the presynaptic side.
The fuse.
The fuse. So the action potential arrives perfectly, the vesicles are loaded, the receptors are fine, but when the signal arrives, the calcium channels don't open properly. No calcium gets in.
No calcium, no vesicles are released, the cannon doesn't fire.
Correct. Or at least very few cannons fire. But here is the weird counterintuitive part. In LEMS, the weakness often improves with repetitive use, at least for a short time.
Wait, really? The more they use the muscle, the stronger it gets. How's that possible?
Because every time the nerve tries to fire, a tiny little bit of calcium manages to sneak in through the few remaining functional channels. If you ask the person to contract the muscle rapidly over and over, like making a fist repeatedly, that small amount of calcium begins to build up inside the terminal. It accumulates.
The pump can't clear it out fast enough.
Right. And eventually, after a few seconds of stimulation, you reach a critical mass of calcium that's high enough to trigger a significant release of vesicles. The muscle suddenly contracts strongly.
That is such a distinct aha moment for a clinician. MG is worse with use because you run out of effective signal. LEMS is better with use because you build up the trigger.
Precisely. It's a mechanics diagnostic. Is the problem with the fuel line or is it with the ignition system? The physiology tells you exactly where to look.
Okay, let's shift gears completely. We've been at the muscle, where the goal is a guaranteed high-fidelity transmission. Now let's go upstairs. To the brain and the central nervous system.
Hmm.
Section 4, postsynaptic integration.
The rules change completely here. In the CNS, that one-to-one guarantee is gone. A single motor neuron in your spinal cord or pyramidal cell in your cortex might have 10,000 other neurons talking to it at the same time.
It's a town hall meeting, not a direct order.
It is, and everyone is shouting different things. Thousands of inputs are shouting fire at the same time that thousands of other inputs are shouting don't fire!
And the neuron has to somehow listen to all of them and make a single binary decision.
Exactly. This process is called integration.
Let's define the currency of this meeting, the votes. We have EPSPs and IPSPs.
Right. The EPSP, the excitatory postsynaptic potential, is a yes vote. This is usually caused by a neurotransmitter like glutamate opening up channels that let positive ions in.
Mostly sodium.
Mostly sodium, sometimes calcium. Either way, positive charge flows into the cell. This makes the inside of the cell less negative. We call that depolarization. It wakes the cell up. It moves its voltage closer to the threshold for firing.
And then we have the IPSP, the inhibitory postsynaptic potential. This is the no vote.
The no vote. And the mechanism here is absolutely crucial to understand. This is usually mediated by neurotransmitters like GABA or glycine, and they typically open up chloride channels.
Chloride, Kl-. So a negative charge flows in, making the cell even more negative.
Sometimes, yes. But Guyton explains this with some beautiful physics involving something called the Nernst potential. Can we get technical for just a second here?
Please, break down what he calls the chloride clamp.
Okay, so a typical resting neuron sits at a voltage of about -65 millivolts. That's its baseline. The threshold it needs to reach to fire an action potential is around -45 millivolts.
So it needs to become 20 millivolts more positive.
Exactly. Now, chloride is a negative ion. Because of its concentration gradient, if you open a door for chloride, it wants to make the cell's voltage settle at about -70 millivolts.
Which is actually more negative than resting potential.
Right. So you might think opening chloride channels doesn't change much. But here's the genius of it. Imagine you have 100 excitatory signals coming in, all pushing the voltage up towards -45.
The yes votes.
But at the same time, an inhibitory neuron has opened up all these chloride channels. That open door for chloride acts like a massive anchor. Any positive charge that comes in is immediately canceled out by negative chloride flowing in, dragging the voltage right back down to -70.
It's not just doing nothing, it's active resistance.
It is powerful active resistance. It clamps the membrane potential near the chloride equilibrium potential. It makes it mathematically almost impossible for the excitatory inputs to reach threshold.
I love that image. Inhibition isn't passive silence, it's an active, heavy parking brake.
Exactly. So the cell body, the soma, is basically an algebraic calculator. It's constantly summing up all the positive currents from the EPSPs and subtracting all the negative currents from the IPSPs.
And we have two main ways to do the math: spatial and temporal summation.
Spatial summation is simply counting votes from different places at the same time. If one excitatory synapse fires, it might only cause a tiny 0.5 millivolt blip. Not enough. But if 40 different synapses fire on different dendrites all at once,
The 40 blips add up.
they add up to the 20 millivolts you need. It's the combined effect of input spread over space.
And temporal summation.
That's one synapse firing repeatedly in rapid succession. Bump, 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 bump. If the frequency is high enough, the second EPSP arrives before the first one has had time to fade away.
So they stack on top of each other.
The little voltage bumps stack up like Lego bricks. Bump, plus bump, plus bump, until you reach threshold. This depends on the time constant of the neuron's membrane. Some neurons are leaky and lose the charge quickly, others can hold on to it for longer, making them better at temporal summation.
Okay, so the votes are cast from all over the cell.
Right.
Math is done. Where is the final decision made? Where is the gavel brought down?
This is a fantastic insight from Guyton. The decision is not made in the middle of the cell body. It's made at the axon initial segment. This is also known as the axon hillock. It's the very first part of the outgoing wire, right where the axon leaves the soma.
Why there? Why not anywhere else?
Because it's the most sensitive part of the neuron. The membrane of the cell body and dendrites is actually quite lazy. It has very few voltage-gated sodium channels. But the axon hillock, it is packed. It has, according to Guyton, 7 times the concentration of voltage-gated sodium channels compared to the soma.
So it has a much lower threshold. It's a hair trigger.
It is the trigger zone. All those little electrical ripples from thousands of EPSPs and IKSPs wash across the cell body. When that combined wave of voltage hits the axon hillock, if the sum total is even slightly above its low threshold, boom. An action potential is generated. The decision is made and sent down the line.
It really gives you a sense of the neuron as a sophisticated little computer. It processes thousands of analog inputs and generates a single all-or-nothing digital output, 0 or 1, fire or don't fire.
But it's a computer that can be modulated in really elegant ways, which brings us to the nuance, section 5.
Yes. We talked about inhibition as a no vote on the main cell body, but Ganong talks about a more surgical type of inhibition that just blew my mind. Presynaptic inhibition.
This is the sniper rifle of the nervous system. Most inhibition is postsynaptic. You put the brake on the car itself. Presynaptic inhibition is about stopping the guy who is about to push the car before he even touches it.
How does that even work anatomically?
It's an axonal synapse.
Yeah.
You have a neuron's axon terminal synapsing onto another neuron's axon terminal.
A wire connecting to another wire's terminal button.
Exactly. Imagine neuron A is trying to talk to neuron B, but neuron C, an inhibitory neuron, creeps in and synapses right on neuron A's button.
So it's acting before the main gap.
Right before the gap. Neuron C releases GABA onto neuron A's terminal. This opens chloride channels in the terminal. This creates a leak, which effectively shorts out the electrical signal of the action potential coming down neuron A's axon.
So the action potential arrives, but its voltage peak is smaller. It's blunted.
And because the voltage peak is smaller, fewer of those voltage-gated calcium channels open. Less calcium gets in. Less calcium means fewer vesicles are released. The signal from A to B is weakened or silenced completely.
It's like turning down the volume on one specific person at the town hall meeting without telling everyone else to be quiet.
It's incredibly powerful because it is so selective. You can inhibit one specific sensory input, say, the feeling of your shirt on your back, while still allowing the neuron to pay full attention to a tap on your shoulder. It filters out the noise at the source.
And then there's another form of control, negative feedback, the Renshaw cells.
This is a beautiful safety loop built right into the spinal cord. A motor neuron fires a powerful signal out to a muscle, but it also sends a little branch of its axon a collateral that loops back and talks to a small inhibitory interneuron called a Renshaw cell.
And where does the Renshaw cell connect?
It connects right back to the motor neuron that just excited it and to its neighbors, and its connection is inhibitory.
So when the motor neuron shouts,
The Renshaw cell immediately whispers back, "Okay, that's enough. Quiet down now."
it inhibits itself.
It inhibits itself a fraction of a second after it fires. It's classic negative feedback. It sharpens the signal. It prevents the motor neuron from firing again too quickly or from getting stuck in an overexcited state. It turns a prolonged shout into a precise, self-terminating command.
We also really need to talk about the environment these neurons are swimming in. Because for all this complex machinery, they seem to be delicate snowflakes.
They really are. Guyton has a whole section on special characteristics of synaptic transmission, and the big one he highlights is pH.
Acidity.
Neuronal activity is profoundly sensitive to the pH of the blood and cerebrospinal fluid. Acidosis, a low pH, severely depresses neuronal activity. It just shuts the system down.
What's a clinical example of that?
The classic one is a diabetic patient in diabetic ketoacidosis, or DKA. Their blood becomes very acidic. As the pH drops, they get progressively more lethargic, confused, and eventually fall into a coma. Their synapses just stop firing effectively.
And the opposite. Alkalosis, a high pH.
High pH makes neurons hyperexcitable. They start firing spontaneously for no reason. This can lead to tingling, muscle spasms, and even full-blown seizures.
And you mentioned a kind of parlor trick related to this.
It's not a trick I would ever recommend, but yes, it's a diagnostic maneuver. If you have a patient who is predisposed to epileptic seizures, and you ask them to hyperventilate,
Breathing very fast and deep.
right, when you hyperventilate, you blow off huge amounts of carbon dioxide, CO2. CO2 makes your blood acidic, so if you lose a lot of CO2, your blood becomes alkaline, the pH rises.
And the hyperexcitable neurons light up.
It can trigger a seizure right there in the doctor's office. It just goes to show you how tight the margins are for the brain to function. We operate in a very, very narrow window of chemical balance.
And oxygen, of course. We can't forget oxygen.
The brain is an absolute energy hog. All this synaptic transmission, especially resetting those ion pumps after every signal, requires massive amounts of ATP, and ATP production requires oxygen. Guyton notes that if you cut off blood flow to the brain, you lose consciousness in 3 to 7 seconds. That's how little buffer we have. The synapses just run out of fuel and the whole system shuts down.
Before we wrap up, I want to touch on one last crucial concept. Plasticity. Because the learner listening to this might be thinking, okay, so I have this incredibly complex machine. Is it hardwired once it's built?
And the answer is a definitive, resounding no. The synapse is dynamic. It changes based on how much it's used. This is the fundamental cellular basis of learning and memory.
Guénon calls one form of this facilitation.
Right. It's a very short-term form of memory. If you stimulate a synapse repeatedly, it becomes easier to stimulate the next time around. The response gets bigger.
And we think this is due to our old friend calcium again.
The ghost in the machine.
Yeah.
Exactly. If you fire the presynaptic terminal rapidly, the calcium pumps can't clear all the calcium out before the next action potential arrives. So some calcium is left over.
A little residue.
A little residue. So when the next signal arrives, you have the new rush of calcium plus the leftover calcium. More total calcium means a bigger release of vesicles, a bigger effect on the postsynaptic cell. The synapse remembers it was just used.
That's short-term memory, lasting seconds to minutes.
It is. And on the flip side of that, we have what happens when a connection is lost entirely. Guénon calls it denervation supersensitivity.
The desperate muscle.
That's a great way to put it. If you cut a nerve to a muscle, the muscle doesn't just sit there and die. It panics. It realizes it hasn't heard a signal in a while. So it starts frantically manufacturing new acetylcholine receptors.
It makes more ears to listen with.
And it spreads them out all over its surface. Normally, receptors are only clustered at the neuromuscular junction. In a denervated muscle, they pop up everywhere. The muscle becomes hypersensitive to even the tiniest stray trace of acetylcholine in the circulation. It starts twitching uncontrollably.
It really shows that the synapse is a relationship. It's a two-way street. If one partner goes quiet, the other one changes its behavior to compensate.
It's a beautiful, if sometimes tragic, biological response to loss of connection.
Wow. We have covered a massive amount of ground. From the 20-nanometer ocean to the zipper proteins, the Botox paralysis, the 3x safety factor at the muscle, and the complex algebra of the brain.
If we synthesize this all down, the big takeaway for me is the trade-off. We started by saying the gap seems inefficient, it slows things down, it introduces a delay.
But the delay is the price of admission for intelligence.
That's it exactly. If we were all electrical synapses, we would be fast, but we would be dumb. We would be simple robots. The chemical synapse allows us to do things that are impossible with wires. It allows us to invert a signal to turn an excitatory yes into an inhibitory no. It allows us to amplify signals, it allows us to filter out noise, and most importantly, it allows the connections to change. It allows us to learn.
The gap is where the thinking happens.
That is the perfect summary.
So here is a final thought for you, the listener, to chew on. We talked about that incredible safety factor, that 3-to-1 guarantee at the neuromuscular junction, and we contrasted it with the probabilistic maybe nature of the brain synapses.
Right.
So imagine we could upgrade your brain. What if every single synapse in your cerebral cortex had the high safety factor of a muscle junction? What if every thought, every single input was guaranteed to transmit to the next neuron?
It's a truly terrifying thought, because if every synapse in your brain had that high safety factor, you wouldn't be a super genius, you wouldn't be limitless, you would be in a constant, massive, unremitting seizure.
Because you couldn't stop a thought from spreading.
You couldn't filter. You couldn't inhibit. A single sensory input, a flash of light, the sound of a pin dropping, would trigger a guaranteed cascade that would light up every neuron in your head. The system would be overwhelmed by positive feedback and crash instantly.
So intelligence requires the possibility of failure at the synapse.
Intelligence requires the ability to say no. It requires the system to be probabilistic, not deterministic. The maybe. The chance that a signal gets dropped is where all the nuance and control and consciousness lives.
The maybe makes us human. That is a fascinating place to leave it.
I couldn't agree more.
Thanks for diving deep with us today. Check the show notes for the diagrams from Guénon and Geisen. Specifically look at that snare protein zipper and the structure of the motor end plate. It's wild. We'll see you on the next one.